TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. I'm your friendly neighborhood philosopher, and with me now is the mighty, the grand, Robert Spencer.
Thank you, David. Good evening.
How you doing,
Good
Robert?
morning, afternoon.
I see you're still
I am
alive.
doing very well so far. So far.
Now, we said last week that we were most likely not going to be back this week because there wouldn't be any Jihad news, and yet here we are. So I'm assuming there's something going on.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, we were hoping that it was going to be all over and that a new era of peace and harmony would dawn in the world, heralded by the religion of peace itself. But instead, there are still apparently some believers who misunderstand this religion of peace and somehow have gotten the idea that it requires them to wage war against unbelievers. Now, where they got this idea, I guess they've been watching your videos, David. I don't know.
It is confusing. And you know what's weird? Because, like, there are people who misunderstand other religions, and you can kind of spot how people are misunderstanding it because other people in other parts of the world don't misunderstand it in the same way. So you've got like Westboro Baptist Church, and they decide that the Christian thing to do is to go around protesting military funerals, right? You don't see that much, right? You don't see Christians in Russia coming up with the same idea. You don't see Christians in Australia coming up with the same idea. So it's like, where are you getting this weird idea from? And yet, when it comes to jihad and terrorist attacks and killing apostates and beating women into submission, even though there are plenty of Muslims in the world who don't do these things, yet we see the same misunderstanding arising all over the place. We see the same misunderstanding in Pakistan that we see in a place that is, ethnically very different, like, Sudan or something like that. And they come to the same misunderstandings, and they'll come to the same misunderstandings that someone who's raised in the UK and believes in Muhammad and the Quran will come to. It's very, very strange misunderstandings.
It's even stranger, David, in light of the fact that even some of the most authoritative sources in the Islamic religion teach these misunderstandings. For example, all the schools of Islamic jurisprudence teach warfare against unbelievers. The various sects, the various schools, the manuals of jihad that explain the concept written by Muslims and for Muslims, they all seem to share this odd misunderstanding. And it's very strange. The only people in the world, as we discussed in brief last week, who really truly understand Islam properly are Western non-Muslim politicians who know that it teaches peace and have no trouble grasping all the peaceful teachings of the Quran, that jihadis who study the Quran, including imams who have been involved in jihad terrorist activity, somehow miss.
And I guess what we have to conclude is that Allah, Muhammad, all of Muhammad's companions, and 14 centuries of Islamic scholars all misunderstood Islam in a lot of the same ways. And yet it's once we get down to our time, our age, that a bunch of westernized Muslims who believe in a whitewashed, watered down Walt Disney version of Islam, they finally get it. And everyone that came before them got it wrong. And so
it's because of its glorious complexity.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you take, for example, a passage like kill them wherever you find them, which is, of course, in chapter 2, verse 191, chapter 4, verse 89, and then in chapter 9, verse 5, kill the mushrikeen, those who associate partners with Allah, wherever you find them. Obviously, kill them wherever you find them is a statement of such tremendous complexity that it takes academic degrees and fluency in classical Arabic, plus years of study to grasp fully what it means.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible for somebody just to open the book and say, kill them wherever you find them. That means kill them wherever you find them. That would be asinine.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that it really means something on the order of give them a hug and buy them a latte. but you have to have a very specialized knowledge to be able to get to that level of understanding.
Yeah, which is weird because in the Quran, Allah brags over and over and over again about how clear his revelations are. They're so amazingly clear. They're the clearest revelations ever. And yet he blurts things out. And it really seems, as I've said before, that Allah had some sort of cosmic Tourette syndrome where he just keeps blurting out all these violent things that he doesn't really mean. He was off his meds, apparently. Now, Robert, we're going to go into the latest jihad news, but I did want to share a brief story about keyboard jihad.
Yes.
I believe I coined that term. I'm not positive, but I mean, I did, I started using it myself. I don't know if anyone else had come up with it, but it's just like all the other classic forms of jihad, like, threats and intimidation and so on, but it's all from the comfort of your keyboard. So you don't actually have to go out and fight the unbeliever. You fight them from your keyboard, right? You just taunt them and threaten them at your keyboard. And so you're not actually in the same kind of danger. Now, were you the one who came up with stealth jihad? You wrote a book called Stealth Jihad, but was that you?
That's right.
Now,
as far as I know, I coined the term.
Now, what is stealth jihad?
Stealth jihad is very simply advancing the same goals that the violent jihadis have, but by nonviolent means, and particularly by means that involve deception and subterfuge. So you were working to impose Sharia, to destabilize non-Muslim governments and impose Sharia around the world, but you're not doing it by blowing things up or killing people. You were doing it by gaining influence, by running an advocacy group, for example, that tries to give a whitewashed version of Sharia to the American people, while demonizing and vilifying people who tell the truth about Sharia, gaining influence in government so that you have power over public policy, things like that.
So just as an example, if we were in a Muslim country that has blasphemy laws, then you could silence critics of Islam just by forming a mob and beating them to death, or by throwing them in prison, and so you could suppress their speech that way. But if what you're saying is correct, then in a place like the United States, where we don't have these blasphemy laws, and you're not going to form a mob and kill someone for criticizing Muhammad, and you're not going to be locked up for saying something about Muhammad. Over here, you're saying that a jihadi would do things differently. It wouldn't necessarily go out and start killing people. You might work a law into effect saying that there's this problem that the government needs to crack down on Islamophobia. And in order to do that, we have to suppress speech. So you'd get the same result as a place like Pakistan, but you'd go about it in a different way.
That's the stealth jihad in a nutshell.
Interesting. So let me share this little quick update on keyboard jihad. So very recently, even before that, I'm sure you are familiar with Hatun Tash and her getting stabbed in the face for making fun of Muhammad. Of course, she did this. Not only did she do this in the UK, not only was she in the UK, but she was at Speaker's Corner, which is supposed to be, hey, this is the hub of freedom of speech. And so she was criticizing Muhammad there and got stabbed in the face by a jihadi. Well, I like to respond to violence peacefully, with art, with criticism, with art. And so I made an origami castle out of the Quran. I call my art Quranigami. But then I didn't end up releasing the video because the castle was big enough to where I put it off for a couple weeks because I understood there was going to be a lot of work. So by the time I finally made my origami castle, it was like the moment had passed and I didn't want to stir things up again. So I was kind enough to let that slide and to sit on that video for a while. Anyway, then I started getting some false flags on my videos and started getting false strikes. Now I beat the strikes, so it was just kind of a temporary, short-term delay. But there was a Muslim who was bragging to me on Twitter and showing me the screenshot of where he had reported it and gotten the video taken down and so on. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and release this video. So I went ahead and released the video. And then at first, for the first couple days, it got like 50 or 60,000 views. So, about what I would expect, because it's not my main sort of content. It's a goofy video. So it looked like it was going to get like 50 to 60,000 views. And then all of Indonesia and Malaysia came at me, like all of them. The entire countries came at me. And so people were posting on Twitter and TikTok, everyone go to YouTube and complain that this is hate speech. Now, of course, this doesn't fit anything. I didn't attack or even say anything about any group in the video. I gave an origami tutorial. I just used the Quran as my paper. That's not hate speech. There are tons of videos of people burning Bibles on YouTube. Guess what? You're allowed to burn Bibles on YouTube. You're not saying, hey, let's go out and kill a bunch of people. You're basically saying, I dislike the Bible so much, I'm burning it. So you're allowed to do that on YouTube. But lots of people in other places think that we're not allowed to do that. So they all basically they mobilized hundreds of thousands of people to come and attack the video and file false complaints. But here's what's funny. So as of right now, and of course, the video might get taken down because YouTube does quite frequently back down from a mob. But so far, it's still up. And what's hilarious is that the plan backfired because all these people complaining about the video. Robert, have you heard of the Streisand effect? You ever heard of that? Yeah.
I have seen.
So the Streisand effect, ladies and gentlemen, it comes from Barbra Streisand. Basically, a photographer was going along from the water, the coast of California, taking pictures of the California coastline, and then posting the pictures on his website. And one of the pictures he took was of Barbra Streisand's house. It wasn't labeled as Barbra Streisand's house. He's just taking pictures along the coastline. Well, somehow Barbra Streisand finds out that there's a picture of her house on this guy's website, and she sues him for $50 million, right? Which is ridiculous. There's no law against taking a picture of the coastline from the water, right? This is like ridiculous. But she's just trying to crush this dude. Well, only a few people had even looked at that picture. It wasn't a popular website. But once it's news that Barbra Streisand's suing someone for this picture, all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of people now start going to the website to see what's going on here. And then, of course, she lost the lawsuit, and then she had to pay that guy's lawyer fees and so on. So that's what the Streisand effect is. That's trying to suppress something that, most people weren't going to see anyway. You end up drawing a lot more attention to it. And so what happened was you had a video that was, after a couple of days, it had, 50 to 60,000. It probably would have gotten to 100,000, but not a terribly massive video. But here's what happened on my website. All these people going around complaining, they ended up sending tons of people to my site. And so let me pull up the chart here. This is what happened. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you see that, you see my normal level of views for the past, for the past 28 days or whatever. And you can see it's, I don't know what that is, around 100,000 a day or something like that, a little more, a little less. And then all of a sudden, yesterday, it shoots up to 857,000 views, which completely shattered my old record for my highest number of views. Before this, the most views I ever got, and I have a pretty decent sized channel. The most views I ever got in a single day was, I think, 281,000 in one day. It was my all-time record. And then this just shattered it. This more than tripled my all-time record because people are complaining, and they complained so much that they got me a bunch of attention, and now my hits are going through the roof. And so, guys, keyboard jihad may have its benefits, but you got to be careful with it, because if you slip up, something like this happens. And it's like, Robert, it's like one of the guys who tries to build a bomb and then it blows up in his face. It's kind of like that, what just happened. All right, so that's the latest news in keyboard jihad. What do we have in the rest of the world? And you may also have examples of keyboard jihad and so on, if it's just stuff on the, if it's stuff that happens from someone's keyboard. But
oh yeah, actually, David, I do. Just recently, I started getting private messages on Twitter from a gentleman who was sending me pictures of ISIS jihadis holding up severed heads. And I don't know how he found so many, but he kept sending them day after day after day. And so,
whoa. Now, is this for him to say, look at this revolting practice? Keep up the good work, Robert, because you're exposing this jihad violence. Was that the intention behind the pictures?
David, I'm sorry to say that was not the case. This was clearly somebody who was in favor of the ISIS beheadings. He had all sorts of ISIS flags and such on his Twitter page. It's really remarkable that somebody like that is able to operate openly. And so I even took a screenshot of one of his beheading photos and put it out in the as an ordinary tweet so that people could see. And I think ultimately he was banned, but it took quite some time because, of course, Twitter just doesn't really care about that kind of activity. It's much more involved in shutting down people who are criticizing jihad activity rather than aiding and abetting it.
I'm surprised you weren't the one banned for saying what someone was sending you. I know that in the past I've gotten death threats, and I say, hey, look, I take a screenshot and I say, hey, look, here's a death threat against me, and Facebook would ban me.
Yeah. I've heard of that happening more than once. Yep. I got to tell you, I don't know why I've lasted this long on Twitter. And any day I expect I'll come downstairs and come into my office and see that it is that I've finally been banned, but it hasn't happened yet. I don't know why.
That's exactly how I feel on YouTube, because I do get strikes and so on, but I always feel like they're just gonna shut me down. Like every day, they've sent me so many like ridiculous bogus strikes. Fortunately, I've won every single one this year, but I was getting strikes like 1 or 2 per week for a while, video takedowns and strikes, and then I would win them all, but it's like constantly throwing you off. But it's to the point where it's happened so much that every day when I get up and open my laptop, I'm assuming the first thing I'm going to see is a strike, or that my channel's shut down. But yeah, that's the brilliant leaders of the tech industry. They love to protect jihad, and apparently pedophiles as well. I don't know if you saw that, Robert, but YouTube is under criticism because there are people who, when they see basically pedophiles online who are using their channels to sort of draw in young people, there are people who expose it, right? They'll take screenshots and say, look what this person is doing. But then YouTube's been shutting them down. YouTube's been shutting them down and banning their content, the content of the people who are exposing the pedophiles. And it's like, wow, finally someone who has the kind of same experience as us. We're exposing something and then we're in trouble because we're the ones exposing the stuff.
It just amazes me, David. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, do they ever come down on the right side of an issue?
No.
Ever?
Mm-mm. Not once.
But anyway, this week in Jihad, I've got a few things here. One thing, actually 2 stories of jihadis in the United States.
In the U.S.?
In the United States, that's right. We're always told that this doesn't happen here. It's only over there. There was 9/11, and that was about it. The Boston Marathon, a few others, but that was it. But actually, if you read Jihad Watch regularly, you'll see there's jihad terror plotting all the time in the United States. One of the stories comes out of Texas, and that is a man was convicted of providing material support to ISIS, and he was sentenced to 12 years in prison a few days ago, Asher Abid Khan, and he pled guilty to aiding ISIS, giving money to people who were going over there. And incidentally, he is a graduate of the University of Houston with an engineering degree. And that's worth noting because so many times people say that jihadis are just poor, uneducated, easily led people. They're not supposed to be university graduates, people who are well off, and so on. The other story out of the United States.
1 second, Robert. I wanted to. There are some interesting points to be made here about this, because you made one of the important points that we're told just gullible people fall for some rhetoric and then they become jihadis, when very frequently, and especially the leaders of these various movements, many of them are like academics, they're like doctors and engineers and so on, so very educated people. Sometimes, like in the case of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, they have degrees in the relevant fields and so on. They know what they're talking about when it comes to Islam. But what you just pointed out, that this guy is funding jihad. He's funding ISIS. And Muhammad said in the hadith, the one who funds a Ghazi, so that's a jihad fighter, will receive the same reward as a Ghazi. So the person, in other words, the person who says, hey, I'm not going to go out and fight myself, but there's a guy who's willing to fight, he just can't afford it, I will pay the bills for him to go out and fight, and I'll sit at home, but I'll pay the bills. And Muhammad said, hey, you get the same reward because he couldn't have done it without you. And so this is straight out of the teachings of Muhammad. Someone's doing it in the United States, saying, hey, I'm not going to go join ISIS, but I will pay for someone else, so that someone else can go fight for ISIS, and straight out of the Muslim sources.
Also, you got to wonder, where is it that a University of Houston graduate, where did he get the idea that ISIS was good to support?
Two words. Robert Spencer.
Yeah. We're always told it's a tiny minority of extremists who are twisting and hijacking the religion of peace, and yet these guys are learning this somewhere. And I think in every one of these cases, why is the mosque not investigated? We're frequently told that it's that these people are radicalized on the internet. But then you have to ask the question, well, why is it that if their mosque is teaching benign, peaceful Islam, why is the benign, peaceful Islam that this guy learned at his mosque not capable of withstanding the appeal of the twisted, hijacked, violent version from the internet? Why is it that he can't answer that challenge within Islam? And that leads to the further possibility that maybe his mosque is teaching that ISIS is just fine. And somebody ought to be looking into that.
Yeah, and guys, that's actually a very important point. So imagine what you hear about Islam and the different places you hear it from. Well, everything you're hearing from politicians is Islam is wonderful and great, and if anything, we need to block criticism of Islam. So everything you're hearing from politicians, everything you're hearing from Hollywood, everything you're hearing from the education system, everything you're hearing from the media is all about how wonderful and peaceful Islam is. Everything you're hearing from Muslim organizations is about how wonderful and peaceful and tolerant Islam is. Everything you're hearing from the mosques when they speak to the media is about how wonderful and peaceful and tolerant Islam is. So what could this guy have possibly encountered randomly that could have convinced him otherwise? I mean, just think that you Christians or atheists who are watching, what would happen if, given everything you've experienced in your life, someone just comes on and says, hey, we got to go start randomly killing and slaughtering people, and someone said, some random person sends you an email saying that? How much of an impact is that going to have on you? Probably not a lot, unless that person can make an airtight case somehow that is massively persuasive, which you won't be able to. And so that raises the question: either you can contact someone online and just make an airtight case that Islam calls on you to wage jihad, in which case that's a problem with Islam, or, as Robert pointed out, this guy's got some other influences on him right here in the United States, and we need to be looking into that stuff. But we can't, because if we do, we're Islamophobes.
Exactly. All right, another material support to ISIS story comes out of Bowling Green, Kentucky, a well-known jihad spot.
Kentucky?
Kentucky Fried Jihad. Mirsad Hariz Adem Ramik, a dual citizen of Bosnia and the United States, and he has been indicted for providing material support to ISIS. He also received military-type training, allegedly, from ISIS. He traveled to Turkey with a couple of friends, and then they crossed into Syria to the ISIS domains. This was obviously a few years ago. He attended an ISIS training camp and learned to fire an AK-47, received other weapons training, and is pictured wearing camouflage and holding an ISIS flag and so on. In any case, he was also trained to use an anti-aircraft weapon to shoot down planes. He was captured. He was extradited from Turkey, and so he's now back in the United States and has been indicted. And here again, the same question. It was in Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's where he was when he traveled over to Turkey and then into Syria to join ISIS. So what was it that he learned in Bowling Green, Kentucky that made him think that would be a good idea? There is absolutely nothing in the public discourse about Islam today that would answer that question, that even makes an attempt to answer that question. And nobody seems to care. But as long as nobody cares, we're going to have more and more stories like this.
So we're back to this issue of if something is actually a misunderstanding, you don't expect different people in radically different areas to come to the exact same misunderstanding. It's like a hallucination, Robert. If I'm hallucinating, you're not going to see the same hallucination. If I have a delusion about reality, you're not going to have the same delusion. So if someone is just misunderstanding Islam in some way, that's sort of like a fantasy that your own mind is coming up with. Why are people coming up with the exact same fantasy and delusion about Islam all over the world? It almost makes you think it must come from the Muslim sources, but we know that's impossible because politicians tell us, and they obviously tell the truth all the time.
Oh, all the time, yes. No one is more trustworthy than a politician. Speaking of speaking the truth and paying for it, there's a story out of Canada this week. A physician named Dr. Sharif Emil. Now, a man with a name like that, he makes me wonder if he's a Muslim himself, but the available stories do not say either way. In any case, he is a pediatric surgeon and a professor at McGill University. And the Canadian Medical Association Journal published a cover photo of a woman wearing a hijab. And Dr. Sharif Emil wrote an article in response that was also published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, where he said, don't use an instrument of oppression as a symbol of diversity and inclusion. It has become liberal to see the hijab as a symbol of equity, diversity, and inclusion. The hijab, niqab, and the burqa are instruments of oppression for millions of girls and women around the world who are not allowed to make a choice. And of course, there is a terrible uproar. The Canadian Medical Journal has apologized, and there is tremendous pressure on Dr. Emil to resign from his position, and so on. But actually, it's really quite obvious that the hijab for millions, he didn't even say for every Muslim woman. He said for millions, it's an instrument of oppression. And there's no doubt about that, because there's story after story that I have documented at Jihad Watch of women being beaten, threatened with death, even killed for refusing to wear the hijab. And so that is an instrument of oppression. He was just telling the truth, but that's not allowed nowadays.
And this is a situation where I understand that people are going to disagree with something like that. I understand that there are plenty of Muslim women who want to wear the hijab and would be offended that he said something like that. But why can't it be this guy's wrong and we're going to explain why he's wrong, and we're going to leave it at that? It always has to be a case of we have to destroy someone's life and career for daring to speak out on behalf of people who are actually oppressed. It's like you're saying, okay, here's this group, and undeniably some of them are oppressed. In other words, undeniably there are some people who would face violent repercussions from their families if they didn't dress in a certain way. So it's part of a system of controlling their behavior. And so is someone allowed to speak out for those people? And you find out, no, not only are you not allowed to speak out, we will try to crush you. We will try to crush you and destroy your life if you disagree with us on this. And again, it's just a situation where, hey, if you disagree, I understand you disagree. And if you want to criticize what he's saying, I will defend to the death your right to say, hey, this guy's wrong. This guy's wrong. What he said is wrong. And here are 7 reasons why what this guy said is wrong. But I have to tell you, Robert, when you have to resort to like trying to destroy people for saying things that are true and that are meant to help people, I really don't trust your motivations. I don't trust your motivations when you have to do that. And I don't think you could actually, when you have to crush someone like that, instead of just saying why he's wrong, I don't believe you're confident in your reasons for saying he's wrong. If you were confident in your reasons, if you're confident that the evidence is on your side, I think you just refute him. But they don't. They have to destroy.
The Muslim Medical Association of Canada has actually called on him, called for an investigation of him, as if he were suspected of some kind of criminal activity, when really under Sharia, for saying something that might be construed as being critical of Islam, he's committed a potentially criminal act. But there's no way under Canadian law there's anything that he could be investigated for. But they're just obviously trying to harass him and silence him so that he doesn't say anything like this again.
And yet you have the da'is, the Dawagandists, popular Muslim speakers, so people like Ali Dawa, saying that once they get their Islamic state, they're going to have the ex-Muslims publicly executed. And he says, you know what, we'll be watching. So they're going to be a crowd there. He's going to be part of the crowd watching these people be executed. And that's actually defended by YouTube when it was pointed out to YouTube. And I'm not in favor of banning him. I want him to say what he actually thinks so we can, expose it. But when it was pointed out to YouTube, hey, this guy's actually calling for people to be killed for leaving their religion. So that's actually calling for violence against people because of their religious beliefs. YouTube said, nope, this is just part of spirited debate. But if I say, hey, death penalty is wrong, suddenly that's hate speech. it's like insane.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I got another one out of the UK here, and that is two men from Bradford in England, Zain Bashir and Usman Tassif, have been given lengthy jail sentences for their roles in trafficking a vulnerable boy into slave labor at a cannabis factory. And in any case, I think that, of course, they probably didn't think that there was anything amiss in what they were doing. After all, the Quran allows for slavery. Muhammad owned slaves, and so on. It was only in the Christian context that abolitionism ever grew historically. And so if they thought that they had an opportunity to enslave this 14-year-old, they didn't hesitate. By their moral compass, there was nothing wrong with that.
It's weird because I think of like the UK as this tiny little place, like you got the United States, this massive place. I think of the UK as like this tiny little space. Like, where are you going to do anything in this tiny little space? Like, where do you even have a cannabis factory with slaves and stuff on your cannabis plantation? Like, where do you even have that? Where do you have it? And yet jihadis find a way.
They were counting on the authorities to think it would be Islamophobic to say anything.
Yeah, because usually it is. Usually you can get away with. I mean, these grooming gangs, these grooming gangs of jihadis oppressing the population. I mean, they got away with grooming, drugging, gang raping, and pimping little 12-year-old girls for years because everyone was terrified. I mean, people were just terrified of saying, "Hey, look what this group is doing." They all seem to be from a very similar religious background here. People were so terrified to say that they would literally rather let it go on forever than to do anything about it. It was only once it got exposed that they were ignoring this problem that anyone actually managed to do anything.
It's still hugely controversial in the UK, either to note that they're Pakistani, which actually not all of them were, but the vast majority, and then to note that they were Muslim is absolutely unheard of, even today after it's happened to thousands of girls. Anyway, story out of Canada, right before Christmas, Sheikh Yunus Kathrada out of a Muslim Youth Victoria in British Columbia, he said that it was forbidden in Islam to congratulate Christians on Christmas. That he said, would you congratulate a fornicator? Would you congratulate a pedophile? Would you congratulate a murderer? And I couldn't help thinking, David, that, well, there are certain things that Muhammad is depicted as doing in the Hadith and Sirah literature that are not only congratulated in Islam, but are considered to be laudable behavior. And so his choice of examples to show that Christians must not be congratulated for Christmas, it was just a bit too. It made me wonder if he was trying to put us on or something. Really, I mean, does he not realize the irony in what he's saying? Maybe not.
Yeah, and I've been seeing that for years, and it's interesting because it's not some random person on Twitter saying it. It'll be popular speakers saying, "Hey, if you're walking down the street and you say, 'Hey, Merry Christmas,' that's worse than murder."
Oh yeah,
it's worse than murder
because it's shirk. It kills the soul.
Yeah, which is funny because, I mean, they had the virgin birth too, right? You got the virgin birth too. So, and they believe that Jesus is the Christ. He's the Messiah, according to the Quran. So you could just be saying, hey, when I say Merry Christmas, I mean, hey, I understand you guys are celebrating the birth of the Messiah. Great, Merry Christmas. No, it's worse than murder. It's worse than genocide. If you've got, it's worse than what Hitler did.
Well, of course, the reason for that, David, as we all know, is that it's because of the incarnation. That because Christians, of course, are saying that God has become man in Jesus Christ and is born on Christmas Day. This is where they part company. If the Christians were saying that it's just some prophet who is the forerunner for Muhammad, then that might be another thing. Also, in the field of what is un-Islamic, we have the Sharia police in Kano State in Nigeria. And a woman there won, Shatu Garko is her name, and she won the Miss Nigeria pageant. And the Sharia police, the Kano State Hizbah Board, actually arrested her parents because beauty pageants are un-Islamic. Now, her parents, of course, were not involved. She entered the beauty pageant on her own. But as far as the Sharia police are concerned, they still have a responsibility, probably because she is unmarried.
And this is interesting. I mean, they have one of the biggest perverts in history as their role model, right? This is a guy who he claimed that Allah gave him a revelation that you can have up to 4 wives, but he got more, right? Because then he got another revelation saying he could have more. His first wife was a rich older woman, rich widow. That's what shows he had pure intention. So he had a rich widow, and then he marries Sauda and Aisha. Aisha, of course, 6 years old at the time the marriage contract's written. He waits till the ripe old age of 9 when he has sex with her. But I mean, he takes the wife of his own adopted son after he causes the divorce by lusting after her. What's that?
She was very beautiful, the sources say. What was he supposed to do? Control himself?
Mm-hmm. And then Battle of Khaybar, he hears that one of his companions, Diha, took this really beautiful woman as his captive. Well, I mean, guys, how do you know these? I mean, how do you know these women are beautiful? How do you know, right? People are checking them out, right? And passing, oh my goodness, Muhammad, you should see how beautiful this woman is. Oh, right? And he's, oh no, I have to take her then. So you got things like that, and then in spite of all his wives, then you have a story that he gets caught having sex with his slave girl in the bed of his wife Hafsa. Hafsa flips out. Then he swears,
drinking honey.
Yeah, he swears an oath. I'll never do it again. I promise, baby, I promise. And then he claims to get a revelation, which is in the Quran, Surah 66, verses 1-2, where Allah tells him, hey, I didn't tell you to make that oath. So you break that oath and you start having sex with your slave girl again. We know.
Sure that he'll destroy them and give Muhammad better wives.
Mm-hmm. And so you've got this guy, and then there are even hadiths where Muhammad's walking down the street and he would see a beautiful woman and he would have to run home to one of his wives because he saw someone else's wife and she was really hot, and so he would be so overcome with lust that he has to run home. Oh, Zainab, come here, I need you, oh, right. And so they've got one of the biggest hornballs in history. We read it's even in the Muslim sources that he would have sex with all 9 of his wives in one day. So he would go have sex, go right to the next. I don't know if he was finishing each time or something like that, but he would run from one house to the next, right? And it's like, and then somehow this is the religion of modesty. Oh, you can't have a beauty pageant. That would be too perverted. What is this, man? What is going on here?
Yeah, it's tough.
Wow.
Okay, let's go to Kenya. There is a Kenyan pastor, a Christian pastor who converted from Islam, and he got a message. Said, "We are getting reports that you are now a Christian. You have been missing our Friday prayer meeting. If this is true, you are risking your life." And they then ultimately they came to him. They started to beat him with hard objects. They broke his leg. They were about to kill him, but a car drove up right at that point, and they didn't know who was in the car. They ran away, and he was saved. His life was saved, although he is still in severe pain and very seriously injured. But this, of course, comes from the death penalty for leaving Islam, which is unique to Islam and is what they would certainly have been. I mean, they were obviously trying to kill him and just hadn't finished before they were interrupted.
And this is, in case people aren't familiar with the demographics, but this is Kenya, right? This is not Saudi Arabia. This is not Sudan or something like that. This is Kenya. The Muslim, it's a mostly Christian country. I think the Muslim population is like 10 or 12% or something like that. And so 10 or 12%, and hey, not allowed to leave. Check in, but you don't check out.
Yep, and Somalia's right there. A lot of jihadis, and so the Kenyan Christians, particularly converts from Islam, are always under threat. Okay, I had one here that I wanted to emphasize, and here it is. Australia. A man named Daniel Greenfield, which caught me up short because Daniel Greenfield is one of my fellow writers at Front Page magazine. And suddenly I'm reading about Daniel Greenfield getting arrested in Australia for plotting jihad attacks against police officers, government officials, and Muslims that he considered to be insufficiently devout. Obviously, it's not the same Daniel Greenfield, but it's a convert from Christianity or Judaism, doesn't say, a convert to Islam in Australia. And so here we have yet another phenomenon of a convert to Islam somehow getting the crazy idea that his religion calls upon him to do violence against people of other religions, which is something that Islamic apologists routinely deny, that there is any kind of peace, any kind of warfare in Islam. Obviously, this is something that he got the idea somewhere, that is Daniel Greenfield. And here again, the question is, where? He converted to Islam. Why wasn't he indoctrinated in all the teachings of peace that we hear so much about? Why did he suddenly get this idea that he had to blow up police officers and government officials and non-devout Muslims?
Very, very strange and confusing once again.
Indeed. We had a Muslim migrant, a man who was apparently drunk, a Moroccan, who in France during Christmas Mass went into a church and started screaming that he was a Muslim. And people were frightened by this for obvious reasons. They were afraid that he was a jihadi. But in any case, he clearly took exception to Christian worship and believed that it was wrong that they were celebrating Christmas.
Now, I'd bet dollars to donuts here, Robert, that if that had happened at a mosque where a Christian walked in and starts yelling something to intimidate people, that would be international headlines.
Yes.
And yet you keep bringing up stuff that I didn't hear about anywhere. And I'm on all the major news sites multiple times per day.
Well, let me go back there. This was in the French newspaper L'Independent on December 26th. French language story only. I translated it for Jihad Watch, and that's the only English report of it as far as I know.
Very confusing here. It's almost like people only report things that confirm their own views.
That is absolutely true, David. That is exactly what they do. Obviously, the news media in the West, for whatever reason, and we could discuss that at great length, is absolutely opposed to reporting anything that is negative toward Islam. And so when you have jihadis, they generally ignore it or whitewash it altogether. Another story out of France. A Muslim woman in a car was waving her Quran around and screaming Allahu Akbar, making dangerous maneuvers and swerves. This was after she had stopped her car in the middle of the road and gotten out to pray in the middle of the road. And then she got back in her car, screaming Allahu Akbar, began to menace people, pedestrians going by.
And of course, we're all familiar with the concept of vehicular jihad, right? Especially France, right? Where they're very familiar with the idea of jihadis not needing guns. You can just get into a vehicle and plow through some people. They're very familiar with that. And so it's like the threat of vehicular jihad. If you start yelling Allahu Akbar and driving around in your car, it's, hey, I'm gonna terrorize people like I'm about to run them down with my car, but not actually do it, so I don't get in nearly as much trouble.
Indeed. Another story out of Australia. A Muslim gentleman named Osman Shaptafaj pleaded guilty to the double murder of his daughter and his son-in-law because they had married without his permission. And of course, this is in line with the very common idea of honor killings in the Islamic culture, which is rooted in chapter 18 of the Quran, where the mysterious unnamed figure known as Khidr in Islamic tradition, or Green, is walking around with Moses, and he kills a boy in an apparently random and gratuitous attack, and then explains, as for the boy, his parents were believers, and we feared that he would overburden them by transgression and disbelief. So we intended that their Lord should substitute for them one better than him in purity and nearer to mercy. And there are a number of Islamic polities, the Palestinian Authority, Syria, Iran, Jordan, that give, Iraq as well, give lighter sentences for what are considered to be honor killings. Of course, Islamic law stipulates that there's no punishment for a father or mother who kills the child. And so this is the background for this behavior. But of course, none of that is reported in the Australian press in the stories about the incident.
And I have to point out, you can justify the honor killings very easily with Islamic law. So you have, for instance, a death penalty for apostasy. But Allah says in Surah 4, verse 65 of the Quran, that a Muslim can have no faith until he makes Muhammad judge in all disputes and finds within himself no resistance against anything Muhammad teaches. And that has led to massive problems over the centuries, because it's very easy to say, oh, you disagree with this. You disagree with this, therefore you're actually an apostate. You disagree with you're misinterpreting this other thing that Muhammad said, therefore you're an apostate. Abu Bakr, after Muhammad died, and some Muslims, well, you had Muslims who actually apostatized. They were only pretending to be Muslim because they were terrified of Muhammad killing them, and so they actually just said, look, we're not in this anymore. But you had other Muslims who wanted to remain Muslims, but they wanted to practice things a little differently. So they wanted to pay their zakat directly to charity and not give it to Abu Bakr, right? Not give it to the centralized Islamic government. Abu Bakr said that if they withhold even a piece of rope that they would have given to Muhammad, he's coming to kill them. In other words, they're apostates to him. So notice, any small disagreement with your leaders is enough to classify you as an apostate and warrant the death penalty for you. So if you're a parent and your daughter's saying, hey, I can dress how I want, I can marry who I want, I can do all these things, I don't, I can live my own westernized lifestyle, there are any number of things that you could accuse her of being an apostate for. So you've got that. You also have Muhammad saying, carry out Allah's penalties even against your own family members. So your family members don't get a free pass just because they're your family members. You carry out the same penalties. And so very easy from an Islamic perspective to say, hey, my daughter thinks she can go her own way. There are all these things within Islam that she is rejecting, and therefore she's under a death penalty. The government's not going to do it, so I'm going to do it myself. And they will feel entirely justified doing this. That's why in places like Pakistan, you'll have a father or a girl's brother. The father kills his daughter, the brother kills his sister, and they'll walk into the police station and say, yeah, I did it.
Oh yeah. They're
proud of it. They're proud of it. They've defended Islam.
Afghanistan. I wanted to pick up on your saying about how not even the smallest disagreement is possible. The Taliban, now in control of Afghanistan, have now forbidden the playing of music in cars. And this is, of course, an extrapolation of the Islamic prohibition on music and the hadith in which Muhammad is made to say things such as, Allah will pour molten lead into the ears of whoever sits listening to his singer on the day of resurrection. I think it might depend on which singer, but he didn't specify.
So just to be clear, everyone, we have the morality laid down by Muhammad and now enforced by the Taliban. If you want to have your prepubescent child bride in the car with you, you're good. But if you play some Bon Jovi or something...
Actually, Bon Jovi, yeah. All right. Let's see. In India...
I keep thinking you're going to run out.
Well, I've got tabs open, and we got 5 minutes. In India... a group of migrants. There were some Muslims and some Christians working in a factory in Kerala, state in India. And these Christian migrant workers started singing Christmas carols. The Muslim migrant workers were enraged and attacked them physically. And the police came and they tried to burn the policemen alive. 5 policemen were injured. And ultimately, the mob was put down, but this was an example of the famous tolerance we always hear in Islam. The reality is that they were so unwilling to hear Christians singing Christmas carols, they were willing to do violence and believed, of course, that Allah would reward their violence in the cause of ending what they believed to be shirk or idolatry.
Misunderstanders. So much, most misunderstood religion in history.
Yes, indeed. Let's see. We have in London. This is actually a live case. This is a gentleman who was identified as being possibly of Somali ethnicity and speaking in Arabic, and he also spoke in English, and he. He attacked a Jewish person, and then several people came to rescue the victim, and he starts shouting things like, I knew you were Jewish, you're Jewish, I'm going to kill you, I want to kill my first Jew. Now, when I read this, I thought of the famous hadith in which Muhammad is depicted as saying, the last day will not come, the end times will not come until Muslims kill Jews. And the Jews will hide behind trees, and the trees will say, oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him. Now, if you believe that, then you believe that if you kill Jews, you are hastening the last day and the consummation of all things.
And this is yet another example of this ongoing problem. What you just said comes directly out of the Muslim sources. You also have the Quran saying that Jews and Christians are the worst of creatures. You have Allah saying in Surah 5 that the most vehement of enemies against the Muslims are the Jews. And so you have all these teachings which lead to actual real world violence. And if we point it out and say, hey, this is a problem. This needs to be exposed. We need to get to the bottom of this, or the problem will just never end. We're the bad guys. We're the evil ones. We're the intolerant ones. We're the bigots for pointing out what the Muslim sources say and how this actually leads to people being killed in the world today.
Yes. And even Vladimir Putin thinks this, because that's another story out of this week. The president of Russia said that it is not a matter of freedom of expression to criticize Muhammad. Rather, it is a violation of religious freedom and the violation of the sacred feelings of people who profess Islam.
The sacred feelings. My feelings are sacred. And notice, it would never... I mean, that's weird, because we think of Putin as being, like, tough, and yet he'll just back down from this. Presumably, what? Because he wants to cut down on the terrorist attacks and act like he's on their side or something. But
week that we're talking right at the end about 32 terror attacks being stopped in Russia in the past year. And so probably Putin is thinking maybe if he makes nice a little bit in this way, throws the freedom of speech overboard. After all, Russia doesn't have that great a freedom of speech tradition anyway, that maybe he'll pacify the situation.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the actual terrorists whose hearts have to melt and they decide to stop their terrorist attacks. You just have to appease people who would inform on them, right? If you have enough people because for some reason a lot of these jihadis, they want to build a bomb and they start going around, hey, anyone know how to build a bomb? Hey, anyone know where I can get a good bomb here, or some bomb building instructions? We've seen that over and over again in the United States, and then they eventually run into someone who goes and tells the FBI, hey, this guy's asking about some bombs here. And so maybe just wants to win the support that way. But notice the sacred feelings. You can't hurt people's sacred feelings. Notice you could never be consistent with this, right? Because notice, I could say, hey, I believe in Jesus, and the Quran hurts my sacred feelings, and therefore the Quran must be banned. No,
your feelings were sacred, David.
Yeah.
Only
I don't have the sacred. Got to get some of those sacred feelings. How do I get some of those sacred feelings, right?
we should go over to the mosque and see if they can give us some.
We should try Amazon. Maybe we can find some sacred feelings for sale on Amazon. All right, we have to wrap it up here. You got one more? Got one more before we head out?
Yeah, we're just out of Pakistan. A bakery refused to write "Merry Christmas" on a cake, and of course there was a big case like that out in the United States a few years back, where a Christian baker refused to. What was it, a gay wedding cake or something like that? In any case, I thought the comparison was interesting because this bakery became showered with congratulations and thanks by people all over Pakistan.
Wow.
So you would think that the religion of peace and tolerance would be a bit more generous with the Merry Christmas cake, but apparently.
No, very strange, very strange. It's as if the tolerance always has to go in just one direction.
Like the sacred feelings.
All right. Well, thanks, Robert, for keeping us all updated on the latest in jihad. The vast majority of the information you share every week is stuff I don't hear about, even though, again, I'm on the main news sites repeatedly throughout the day, and yet I only hear this from you. So I would encourage everyone out there to follow Robert's website, Jihad Watch. The link is in the description box. And also, if you'd like to understand why jihad has been so relentless over the years, get a copy of his book, The History of Jihad, and that link is also in the description box. So, once again, Robert, I'm assuming we will not be here next week.
It's all over now because obviously these are just a few misunderstandings of the religion of peace, but surely they're not going to keep recurring.
Nope, they've run out of jihadis because all the jihadis have been caught. And there's no way such a peaceful religion is going to produce any more. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're done with This Week in Jihad forever because jihad has been finished. God bless everyone.
And Tiny Tim.